Tonight we are in Matthew 25 again. We are in the second parable that Jesus spoke about readiness and rewards. Matthew 24 taught us about these things, and we know there's no chapter divisions as Jesus gave this discourse. Matthew 24 and 25 are all part of the same sitting, the same continuous teaching. And in Matthew 24:44, we had the direct instruction of which all the things that follow are just but explanation and further illustration of the point. The main point, Matthew 24:44, for this reason you must also be ready. For the Son of Man is coming in an hour when you do not think he will. Who then is the faithful and sensible or faithful and wise slave, whom his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is the slave whom the master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that evil slave says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, and begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, an hour that he does not know, and he will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, and in that place there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the first instruction, the main instruction, is be ready always, because you don't know when the Lord returns. So there was the teaching about the faithful and wise versus the evil and foolish slave. And then, pardon me, as we went into chapter 25, there was the instruction about the 10 virgins. There was the parable about them, whether they were ready or not, and 5 were ready, and 5 were not. And last week we gave instruction about parables to not over-explain and not overreach. When it comes to parables, understanding that usually there's a main point or two that a parable is trying to get at, and that's what it's trying to instruct us. And so with the parable of the virgins, we saw that the need of patient waiting and of preparation. And now in our next parable, verse 14 of Matthew 25, we're going to have faithful working. So parable 1 was in Matthew 25 was about waiting and preparation. And now in the second parable of this chapter, the third in all because of the one in Matthew 24, this parable will be about faithful working. So we had faithfulness in all regards. We had faithful devotion to duty in Matthew 24. We had faithful waiting and preparation in the parable of the virgins. And now we're going to have faithful working in the parable of the talents. So let's just read the whole thing, then go back and make some observations. Matthew 25:14. For it is just like a man about to go on a journey, who called his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, each according to his own ability. And he went on his journey. Immediately, the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and gained 5 more talents. In the same manner, the one who had received the 2 talents gained 2 more. But he received the 1 talent, went away, and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. The one who had received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more talents. And his master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You are faithful in a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one who had received the 2 talents came up and said, Master, you entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have gained 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You are faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one who had received 1 talent came and said, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. And I was afraid, and I went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what is yours. But his master answered and said, You wicked, lazy slave. You knew that I reaped where I did not sow and would gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put the money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received back my money with interest. Therefore, take away this talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have will be taken away. Throw the worthless slave into the outer darkness, in the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the parable there of the talents. So we'll now be sharing on the screen. So Matthew 25, we had these parables and teaching of readiness and of rewards. And in this, here we have in this parable of the talents, the faithful work that these slaves did by his blessing. Now, I know most of the time we spend our energy on the fellow who got 1 talent. We spend most of our time looking at the fellow who lost out. But I think we do that a bit of injustice to the parable if we do, because Jesus spent as much time on the faithful ones as the unfaithful. There's a pretty equal treatment of both. It'll also be true in the next parable. And I think on this one, we're a little more fair balanced in our explanation and our talk about it, in the amount of time we give to each, when we talk about the judgment of the sheep and the goats. And so we have just about equal amount of time on both. We first find here is a parable about working, about faithful working. So the other was faithful waiting, was good preparation. This will be faithful working. And we note that the fellows who do the work, they do it not with their own money, but they do it with, and I like the word it uses here in verse 14, what is entrusted to them. He entrusted his possessions. He entrusted his possessions. In this case, it was 8 talents. Now, 8 talents by any measure is a decent amount of money. And it might be, probably likely is, not just a decent amount of money, but it's likely an absolute fortune. So last week I asked you, I said, here's your homework. Find out what a talent is. What is a talent? Now, one thing about this, it is really hard to put ancient money, especially when you try to compare purchasing power or in any way with modern money. It's really difficult to get any kind of equivalence. But in a nutshell, what's a talent?
My footnote says 6,000 denarii, which is a day's salary.
All right, so 6,000 days' wages. 6,000 days' wages. How much? How many? No. Yeah, a talent. Yeah, a talent was a weight, and of course we're dealing with money by precious metal. Of course, we obviously know we're dealing with money in this paragraph because the master said you could have put it in the bank. Yeah, so there's also at different times, talents weigh different amounts. But the main talent, and we think this is likely the talent Jesus would have used, is the talent that was 130 pounds. That's basically 5 bars, like a gold bar, 5 gold bars, or 5 silver bars. 5 gold or 5 silver bars, most likely. There's a very similar parable to this one in Luke. In Luke 19, there's the parable of the minas. And anytime you hear, sometimes you'll hear people talk about the parable of the talents, and they'll talk about the guy that got 10. And what they're doing is they're conflating the parable of the minas, because in the parable of the minas, which was not long before Jesus got to Jerusalem, he talked about a guy getting 10 minas, 5 minas, and 1 mina. In this one with the talents, it's 5, 2, and 1. In the minas, it's 10, 5, and 1. The mina was 60 shekels. 60 shekels made a mina, and then 60 minas made a talent. That was one way they did things. But this this talent here, this talent in modern equivalents, if it's gold and the talent was 130 pounds, it's $2.4 million. If it's one of the smaller talents and it's only silver, each one of these things might be $25,000. So our low estimate is if it's a talent of silver with the smaller talents, our low estimate is approximately $25,000 a talent. Our high estimate, which I think the way this parable is probably the more likely, but in any case, our high estimate is a couple of $1 million per talent. If you look back through the Old Testament, just run your Bible word search on talent and talents, you'll find talents mentioned all over. And almost always in the Old Testament, in the historical records that mention talents, when talents are at play, it's the money of kings and countries. This is the unit of money that kings and countries paid tribute to each other in, paid ransom in, and prospered as a kingdom in. So this is governmental size units of money. And so, if there's a check for $4,000, or there's a check even for maybe, $6,000 or $8,000, we think, well, that could be a person's check. But once you start getting into government money, right, where there's 6 and 7 zeros, we kind of need a new scale. There's a difference between personal money and government money. Well, talents in the Old Testament, we're talking government money here. Just 2 quick examples from the Chronicles. 2 Chronicles 9, the weight of gold which came to Solomon in a year was 666 talents of gold. Now, 660 is a whole lot more than 10, or a whole lot more than 5, but that's the wealth of Solomon there. And so Solomon's gold is counted in talents. Now, quite a few of them, but still, you're counting talents. Or in 2 Chronicles 25, talks about Amaziah. He hired 100,000 valiant warriors out of Israel for 100 talents of silver. And so 100 talents got you 100,000 warriors. So a single talent would get 1,000 warriors. So if you need to hire 1,000 men, get a talent of silver. Well, what did the master just hand these slaves? What did he just entrust them with? Enough money to go hire 1,000 guys. And so, and that's if it's silver. If it's gold, it'd be a whole lot more. So he has entrusted them with absolutely large amounts of money. One thing we sometimes hear based on, and we'll talk about it at the end, the application of talents to abilities, not to money, but to abilities. And sometimes you'll hear somebody referred to as a one-talent man. Well, it's sort of like calling somebody a one-talent man, using this parable as the basis of it. It's sort of like calling somebody a single millionaire, a one millionaire. We really don't have a term for one millionaire. We have multimillionaire, but we don't have one millionaire. So a one-talent man is still he's with the millionaires. He's not with the regular folks. So this was a massive amount of trust given by the master to the slaves. And it says that he gave them according to their ability. And so he knew who could handle 2, and he knew who could handle 5. He also knew who could handle 1. The fellow who had the 1 didn't handle it well, but the master knew he could have. So the slaves, 1, immediately, I think there's probably some significance to that. Immediately, the one who got the 5 went and traded with them, and he got 5. And the one who got the 2 in the same manner. So they get started right away, and they get a good increase. I don't know how long the master was gone, but they're able to double the money. But then the other slave, the one who received the 1, he goes and he buries it. He dug a hole and he hid the master's money. So he's got to make sure he doesn't lose it, but he's not going to work with it. And so this is not a case where, you've handed somebody the retirement funds and say, invest this wisely and don't lose any. We need you to invest conservatively for capital, protection. We're not so much interested in accumulation. We're interested in protection of assets. No, this is go gain. This is be aggressive. This is go trade, go buy, go sell, go invest. He doesn't do any of it. And so the faithful, the one who was given 5 and the one who was given 2, we find that they are greatly rewarded. So they are taken care of by the master. So as they did well, as the accounts were settled, they would be given even more. So after a long time, the master came back. So this just tells us how long the other slave did nothing. A long time the master comes back, and the one who received the 5 talents came up with 5 more. He said, Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. I've gained 5 more talents. The master said, Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful in a few things, and I will put you in charge of many. Enter into the joy of the master. Well, we have to, again, appreciate just the scope and the scale of this master's trust and of this master's reward. He says, here's your 5 talents. If a talent, if we were right about it being $2.3 million, he just was given $10 million, $12 million to use, and he gives his master back $25 million. And so the master says, you were faithful in a few. You were faithful in a little. And even if we take it at just the talents, only $25,000. So he's given 120,000, 130,000, and he gives his master back $250,000. And the master here, he's happy. He's generous. He is rewarding, and even at the lowest number, is $250,000 here, an equivalent that we're talking about. At the highest, it's not $250,000, but it's $12 million or so. And this master says, "You were faithful with a little bit. I appreciate that. I'm going to give you a whole lot more." And so most of the time, if we were in charge of a $250,000 concern, or if we were in charge of a $12 million concern, we might think that to be something extraordinary. We might think that to be something to be proud of. And this master, in comparison to what else that he has and what else he can offer, he says, this was a little bit, but you were faithful. What's important to me, this master says, is that you were faithful. And the next guy who had the 2 talents, and again, that might have been $5 million, that might have been $50,000, whichever. I think it's more likely to $5 million. He comes and says, "Here, I brought you the same. I have doubled what you gave me." And this master says, "Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master." He's going to also likewise receive many joys. He's going to receive great blessing. The fact that he didn't bring as much as the first guy, not a problem. He wasn't given as much. He's still given a lot, but he didn't have as much, but he was faithful. This is a lesson of faithfulness, a lesson of faithful work. It's not about the absolute numbers. It's not about the absolute numbers given. It's not about the absolute numbers returned. It's about the faithful working with what you had. Well, then we got the unfaithful. He knows it's his turn. And before he can even be asked, he starts preemptively making complaints. He starts preemptively making excuses. He tries to put the master on the defensive when this master has been, at least with the first 2, and the last time he dealt with this guy, the master's been nothing but kind, generous, understanding, but he knows he cannot give a good account. And so since he cannot give a good account, he goes on the attack. Then the one who received, verse 24, the 1 talent. came up and said, Master, I knew you to be a hard man. Let me ask you, is there anything we've seen about this master yet that makes him sound like a hard man? He entrusts, according to their ability, vast sums to his slaves. To the slaves who were faithful with what he gave, he gives them great rewards, multiples of what they had before, based on their faithfulness. But he comes up and says, oh, you're hard. And here's how you were hard. You're reaping where you didn't sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. And so he said, oh, you like to make a profit. Well, why didn't you do something then? He's going to say a little bit later. But we don't know that that's true. We don't know anything about that being true. There's nothing that we've seen about this master so far that even suggests that kind of thing might be true. So I was afraid. And I went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, here's what's yours. So here it is back. Hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained, but I didn't lose anything at least. Here, you can have it back. Now, I think this slave is correct in one thing. I think that he was correct in saying he was afraid. But I think he gets the order wrong. I don't think he was afraid when he got the talent. I think he's afraid when he has to make an account for the talent. He didn't seem afraid when he buried it. He seemed lazy. But now that he's been caught out at being lazy, now is the time to be afraid. And so he backdates, as it were, the afraid part and uses that to justify his laziness. And have you ever met the lazy fella? What will he say or do to justify his laziness? Well, he'll get things out of order. He'll make stuff up. He'll try to put you on the defensive, though you're wrong for asking him to do stuff. So, well, here's your talent. At least I didn't lose it. Thanks. Thanks again for that. No. And so he is rebuked, and he is punished as we go on. Verse 24. But his master answered and said to him, you wicked and you lazy slave. Wicked and lazy. So he's called out for his bad action. He is wicked. He is lazy. He's not afraid. He's now, but that wasn't his problem. His problem is he's lazy. You knew, Master says, okay, you want to say that about me? I'll take it. You knew that I would reap where I didn't sow and gather where I scattered no seed. Oh, you want to think that about me? Fine. That just all the more condemns you because you knew you should be doing something. If I have this kind of energy, you should have some of the same. Then you ought to put the money in the bank. And on my arrival, I would have received my money back with interest. And so you think about just, whatever the money changers need money so they can lend it to other people. They're going to take most of the money, that's lent out for themselves. Of course, they also take the risk. But they would give you some interest. And the master was gone a long time. What's the secret to saving, they say? Compound interest over time. Well, he was gone a long time. I don't think he would have doubled the money like these other faithful men had done, because do you get more by saving or get more by working it? You probably get more by working it. But he would have got something, but he didn't even do that. It says in Proverb 20 and verse 4, the sluggard does not plow after the autumn, so he begs during the harvest and has nothing. You don't work at the right time, you don't work in the right season, you'll have nothing at harvest. Another proverb, the sluggard said, there's a lion outside. I'll be slain in the streets. I can't go out. There could be a lion. Or Proverb 24, I passed by the field of the sluggard and by the vineyard of the man lacking sense. Behold, it was completely overgrown with thistles. Its surface was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. When I sat, I reflected upon it. I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And then your poverty will come upon you like a robber, and your want like an armed man. Now, it doesn't say you can never sit down and rest. It doesn't say you can't sit down. Notice in the middle of this last proverb, what it say? I sat and I reflected. You know, a man who's too busy to ever sit and reflect, to meditate on God's word and to study it, that man has a problem. That man's life is out of balance. But the man who always sits and always reflects and never works, his life's deeply out of balance as well. And this man knew that he should be doing something, but he didn't do it. So therefore, verse 28, take away the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. Well, if you want to make money with your stuff, who do you give it to? Give it to the successful. Give it to the ones who are faithful. Give it to the ones who have done something with it. And so he says, everyone who has, more shall be given, and he shall have an abundance. Now, again, these people are faithful. If you are a faithful worker, you will be given, and you will be blessed, and an abundance will come to you. But from the one who doesn't have, and why doesn't he have? This one doesn't have because he's lazy. It's not that he's had a run of bad luck. It's not that some of these investments went south. It's not that the harvest got knocked over by the wind or the locust came. No, this was many years. He hadn't worked for many years. So that's why he had nothing. He was lazy. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. And cast out this worthless slave into outer darkness, in the place that there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. This one gets the place of torment. This one does not enter the joy of the master. This one goes to the place of outer darkness. Now, obviously, the lesson here isn't about financial things. Well, it'll work for that. Be lessons there, helpful things. But this is a lesson about spiritual things. And this is what we have through the Apostle Paul. He says if a man would cleanse himself of these things, these defilements of the flesh and these things that are dishonorable, he would be a vessel for honor, sanctified, useful to the master, prepared for every good work. So the faithful man spiritually who is clean, he's a vessel that God can honor and God can use. Of course, talking to Titus then, Paul talked about the other kind of folks, those who profess to know God, but by their deeds they deny him, being detestable and disobedient, worthless for any good deed. And so over time, this is what we find, because evil men and impostors, the Apostle Paul would say, proceed from bad to worse. But the faithful are faithful and blessed. And the faithful grow. And the faithful, the things that they do prosper under the hand of God. And so one man is prepared for every good work, and the other man ends up being worthless for any good deed. And that's what we find here with the fellows who get the talents. Some of these guys were prepared for every good work, and some of these guys were useless for any good deed. Now, if we talk about a little bit more on points of application, we know that the word talent for us is no longer a measure of money. We never talk about money anymore as talents. This is an interesting thing. The English word talent, which comes to us in the English language from the 1200s. So we've had this word in English for a very long time. It means, and this is from the dictionary, the etymological dictionary, it means an inclination or disposition, a will or a desire. It comes from this word for money. Originally, it meant a balance, a weight, or a sum of money. Originally, and this is from the dictionary, an ancient unit of weight or money varying greatly in its weight. But then in English and other European languages, the current sense developed from a figurative use of the word in the sense of money, meaning special natural ability or aptitude, which developed in that came from the 1300s, from the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. And so our English word talents actually comes from teaching on this parable. And the application of this not to money, because how many of us have been given or expect to be given multiple chunks of either $25,000 or be given chunks in multiple millions of dollars to go and use? And most of us don't expect that. But do all of us have, as something God-given, abilities or aptitudes, desires, and will? We all do. And so this is where most of the time when people talk about talents and the parable of the talents, they think about using well the abilities and aptitudes and the leanings of mind, the disposition of will that they have, and putting that into good service for God. And that is a very important thing to do, and that is a good and wholesome explanation and application of this passage. It's not what the passage is first about. The passage was about faithful work. Of course, mostly what do we have to work with? Well, we all have some kind of opportunities or resources, but we also have our own abilities. And so let's not just think about with talents our own abilities, which we should certainly use rightly and properly for the Lord, but also whatever other opportunities and whatever other resources God has given us. And if we see in this parable saying, well, I don't have as much opportunity, resources, abilities as the next guy, so I can be excused. And so it's amazing how many people, when they don't want to work, class themselves automatically with the one-talent man. Of course, as we noted with the money, even the one-talent man had how much money? More than enough to do something with, right? What if we took the smallest amount of measure of money here and said, well, a fella, he couldn't get really started on anything because he only had $25,000. Like, come on. You can't, you got $25,000, you couldn't do something? Yeah, well, and probably he likely had much, much more. And the same thing with us. If we were to say, oh, I couldn't do anything. I didn't have the opportunity. I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the ability. I didn't have the, I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have the mind. I didn't have the, no, what you're missing is the will. What you're missing is the disposition to work. We don't have, when it comes to talent, ability, opportunities, and resources, I don't think we have many more one-talent men than this guy here in the parable. Even if we are just but the one talent, there's still a bunch of things we could work with. Hey, how many people do you know? How many people do you talk to? How many things has God given you the ability to do? What have you done with it is the question. So the worthless slave, the lazy slave, the frightened slave, this is the guy we don't want to be. We don't want to be like him. We want to be faithful. We want to be faithful workers for the Lord. So we had a parable about preparedness, which had a lot to do with how we waited. Now we have a parable about usefulness, which is an awful lot about how we worked. And now we got one more parable in this chapter. Lord willing, that'll be next week. And it is instruction about the judgment and how they're separated to the right and the left.